The operating theater at Mount Elizabeth Hospital gleamed under surgical lights that could illuminate a human heart with microscopic precision. Dr. Jonathan Chen's hands moved with the rehearsed choreography of a man who had performed over 2,000 cardiac procedures, each suture a thread between life and death, each incision a calculated risk that his decade of training had prepared him to take. At 3 a.m., when Singapore's skyline glittered like a circuit board of ambition, he worked to repair a mitral valve in a 58-year-old minister's chest while his scrub nurse anticipated his every need with the silent efficiency that made them the hospital's most requested surgical team. Priya Sharma stood across the table, her dark eyes visible above her surgical mask, watching his hands with an intensity that had nothing to do with professional duty and everything to do with the secret they'd been hiding for 8 months. She was 32 years old, brilliant at her work, and pregnant with his child. In exactly 9 hours, his wife would discover the truth. In 12 hours, Priya would be dead. And the marble floors of Singapore's most prestigious private hospital would prove that even in a nation built on rules and order, some passions destroy everything they touch. Priya Sharma was born on August 12, 1985, in a middle-class neighborhood of Chennai, Tamil Nadu, where the smell of jasmine competed with auto rickshaw exhaust and where hope lived alongside the grinding reality of India's economic hierarchies. Her father, Rajesh Sharma, worked as an accountant for a textile company, his meticulous attention to numbers providing a modest but stable income that placed the family firmly in India's aspirational middle class. Her mother, Lakshmi, taught Hindi at a local school, supplementing the family income while instilling in her 3 daughters the belief that education was the only reliable ladder out of limitation. Priya was the middle child, positioned between her older sister Anjali, who excelled at academics with effortless brilliance, and younger sister Divya, whose artistic talents earned recognition in every school competition. Priya found her own path in the practical sciences, showing particular aptitude in biology and chemistry. While Anjali dreamed of civil service examinations and Divya sketched fashion designs, Priya was drawn to nursing, a profession her grandmother dismissed as glorified maid work, but which Priya recognized as offering both meaningful service and international mobility. Her childhood was comfortable by Chennai standards. A 3-bedroom apartment in Mylapore, school uniforms that were purchased new rather than handed down, occasional family trips to temples in Kerala and Karnataka. But comfort wasn't abundance. Her parents calculated every expense, saved ruthlessly for their daughters' futures, and spoke often about the importance of securing good positions that could support families and provide security in an uncertain world. Priya attended Madras Medical College's nursing program, one of South India's most competitive institutions, where she excelled in surgical nursing specialization. Her clinical rotations at Government General Hospital exposed her to medicine at its rawest. Overcrowded wards, limited resources, patients who arrived too late for interventions that could have saved them. She learned to work with precision under pressure, to anticipate doctors' needs before they vocalized them, to remain calm when chaos erupted around her. But she also observed the vast disparities in Indian healthcare. Private hospitals with world-class facilities served patients who could afford treatment that cost more than most families earned annually, while government hospitals struggled with equipment shortages and overwhelming patient loads. The doctors who taught her spoke casually about opportunities abroad: the United Kingdom, Australia, Singapore, the United States, where nursing was respected, compensated fairly, and offered quality of life impossible to achieve in India's saturated job market. The decision to pursue international nursing came during her final year, when a recruitment agency visited her college presenting opportunities in Singapore. The presentation painted an enticing picture: a first-world city-state with world-class hospitals, salaries 4 to 5 times what Indian nurses earned, and a legal framework that protected foreign workers' rights. The cost of processing, nearly 300,000 rupees for exams, certifications, agency fees, and initial expenses, represented a significant investment, but one her family deemed worthwhile for a daughter whose future would be secured through such placement. Priya passed her Singapore nursing board examinations in 2010, obtained her work visa sponsorship through a healthcare recruitment agency, and arrived in Singapore on March 15, 2011, at age 25. She carried 2 suitcases, her nursing credentials, and her mother's blessing whispered at Chennai Airport: "Make us proud, but don't forget who you are." Singapore hit her like sensory overload packaged in tropical humidity. The island nation was everything Chennai wasn't. Obsessively clean, ruthlessly efficient, expensive beyond her initial comprehension. The MRT trains ran with Swiss precision. The housing developments rose in geometric perfection. The shopping districts along Orchard Road displayed wealth with a casualness that seemed almost obscene compared to Chennai's chaotic vitality. But it was also isolating, impersonal, a place where efficiency replaced warmth and where foreign workers existed in a parallel society that served but never quite belonged to the affluent core. Her first placement was at Tan Tock Seng Hospital, a public institution serving Singapore's diverse population. The work was demanding, 12-hour shifts, rotating schedules that destroyed any semblance of regular sleep patterns, and the constant pressure of Singapore's medical standards, which tolerated no errors and showed little mercy for mistakes. But the compensation was real, 3,200 Singapore dollar monthly, more than she'd have earned in 6 months at a Chennai private hospital. After paying 800 Singapore dollars for her shared room in a Woodlands flat with 3 other Indian nurses, she sent 1,500 Singapore dollar home monthly, transforming her family's financial situation while saving the remainder for her own future. For 6 years, Priya worked in general surgical wards, building a reputation for competence, reliability, and the kind of unflappable demeanor that made doctors request her for complex cases. She obtained additional certifications in perioperative nursing and surgical technology. She learned Mandarin basics to communicate with elderly Chinese patients, studied Malay phrases for the minority population, and perfected her English to the neutral, accent-minimized standard that Singapore's professional class expected. Her social life existed primarily within Singapore's Indian expatriate community. Weekend gatherings in Little India, Tamil movie screenings, temple visits during festivals, and the occasional date with Indian men working in IT or finance who her parents hoped might become suitable marriage prospects. But those relationships never progressed beyond a few meetings. The men wanted traditional wives who would eventually return to India. Priya wanted a life she was still defining, one that didn't fit neatly into anyone's expectations. In 2017, at 31, Priya received the offer that would change everything: a position at Mount Elizabeth Hospital, Singapore's premier private medical facility. The hospital catered to wealthy Singaporeans, medical tourists from across Asia, and international patients seeking world-class care in a city known for medical excellence. The salary jumped to 4,800 Singapore dollar monthly, but more importantly, the position offered specialization in cardiac surgical nursing, the pinnacle of her profession, working with the best surgeons in Southeast Asia. Her assignment to Dr. Jonathan Chen's surgical team came during her 2nd month. He was Mount Elizabeth's star cardiac surgeon, educated at National University of Singapore and Johns Hopkins, known for pioneering minimally invasive techniques, and possessed of the supreme confidence that came from rarely losing patients. At 38, he'd published extensively, spoke at international conferences, and represented the apex of Singapore's medical meritocracy. A local success story in a field often dominated by foreign specialists. Their first surgery together was a coronary artery bypass on a 62-year-old businessman. Priya's performance: anticipating instrument needs, monitoring vital signs, maintaining sterile protocols with military precision, impressed Dr. Chen enough that he requested her for his subsequent procedures. Within months, they'd developed the kind of surgical synchronicity that made complex operations flow like choreographed performances. He trusted her judgment, valued her input, and treated her with a professional respect that contrasted sharply with some surgeons who viewed nurses as interchangeable support staff. The transformation from professional respect to personal interest happened gradually, imperceptibly, the way most dangerous things do. Extended surgeries led to conversations during brief breaks. Shared cases fostered inside jokes about difficult patients or administrative absurdities. Dr. Chen began seeking her opinion on surgical approaches, discussing cases with her as a colleague rather than merely giving orders. Priya found herself looking forward to their shifts together, appreciating his brilliance while also noticing the way exhaustion softened his usually controlled expression, the rare smiles that made him seem approachable despite his status. She knew he was married, a fact as obvious as his wedding ring and as irrelevant as his personal life was supposed to be in their professional relationship. She also knew that in Singapore's stratified society, the distance between a Chinese cardiac surgeon from an affluent family and an Indian foreign worker nurse was measured in more than just professional hierarchy. It was social, economic, cultural, a chasm that no amount of surgical competence could bridge. Until the night of November 8, 2017, when everything changed. Dr. Jonathan Chen represented Singapore's model minority success story, the kind of narrative the government highlighted in National Day speeches about meritocracy and opportunity. Born in 1979 to a family that had risen from his grandfather's work as a dock laborer to his father's position as a successful shipping logistics businessman, Jonathan embodied the nation's climb from third-world port to first-world financial center in a single generational leap. His childhood in a Bukit Timah landed property was privileged by any standard: piano lessons, tuition classes, family vacations to Europe and Australia, and the unspoken expectation that he would attend National University of Singapore, preferably studying medicine, law, or engineering. His parents, David and Margaret Chen, had sacrificed their own aspirations to build wealth for their children. In return, they expected Jonathan and his younger sister Rachel to convert that wealth into professional prestige and social standing. Jonathan excelled academically because failure wasn't conceptually possible in his family. He topped his cohort at Raffles Institution, scored perfectly on A-levels, and entered NUS Medical School at 18. Medicine chose him more than he chose it. His aptitude for sciences and his parents' insistence made it the obvious path. He discovered his passion for cardiac surgery during his clinical rotations, fascinated by the mechanical elegance of the heart and the intellectual challenge of repairing its failures. His marriage to Grace Chen in 2008 was as much strategic alliance as romantic union. Grace came from similar stock. Her father owned a chain of dental clinics. Her mother served on multiple charitable boards, and Grace herself was a corporate lawyer at one of Singapore's top firms. They met through family friends, dated with the approval of both sets of parents, and married in a lavish ceremony at Capella, Singapore that was photographed for Tatler's Society pages. For the first few years, the marriage functioned adequately. Both were consumed by career building, Jonathan completing his fellowship at Johns Hopkins, Grace making junior partner at her firm. They purchased a condominium in the Ardmore Park area, furnished it with tasteful minimalism, and hosted dinner parties where conversations revolved around property values, children's school placements, and the perpetual complaint of Singapore's wealthy that success wasn't as satisfying as achievement had promised it would be. But the relationship lacked genuine intimacy. Grace was brilliant, accomplished, and emotionally unavailable. Her affection expressed through efficiently managed household administration rather than spontaneous warmth. Jonathan was equally guilty, channeling his emotional energy into surgery where outcomes were measurable and success meant saving lives, rather than navigating the ambiguous terrain of marital happiness. They had sex on a schedule that became increasingly infrequent. They discussed starting a family with the enthusiasm most people reserved for discussing tax planning. They were partners in a successful life that neither of them particularly enjoyed living. By 2017, at 38, Jonathan had achieved everything his parents had envisioned and felt a hollowness he couldn't articulate. His surgical outcomes were excellent, his research was published, his income was substantial, and his life felt like an elaborate performance of someone else's script. He watched patients recover from cardiac surgery with more joy than he'd experienced in years of personal milestones, wondering when achievement had stopped correlating with fulfillment. The night that everything changed began with an emergency surgery on November 8, 2017. A 45-year-old woman had suffered an aortic dissection, a catastrophic tear requiring immediate intervention. Jonathan was called in at 11 p.m., and Priya was the senior surgical nurse on the emergency roster. The procedure lasted 7 hours, pushing both their skills to limits where precision and exhaustion intersected dangerously. When they finally closed at 6 a.m., the patient stable and likely to survive, Jonathan experienced the kind of euphoria that came from winning battles against mortality. Priya's eyes above her surgical mask reflected the same exhausted exhilaration. They'd saved a life through perfect coordination, each anticipating the other's needs in those critical moments when seconds mattered. "Coffee?" Jonathan asked as they stripped their surgical gowns. "I think we've earned it." They sat in the hospital's 24-hour canteen, still in scrubs, watching Singapore wake up through floor-to-ceiling windows. The conversation started with the surgery, technical discussion of their decisions, what had worked, what they'd do differently next time. But exhaustion lowered defenses, and the conversation drifted into more personal territory. "Do you ever miss India?" Jonathan asked, genuinely curious about a world he'd only encountered through luxury hotels during conferences. "Every day," Priya admitted. "The chaos, the colors, the way people actually talk to each other instead of just being efficient. But I also don't miss struggling to pay rent or watching my parents worry about money constantly. Singapore gave me security. India gave me warmth. I haven't figured out how to have both." Jonathan found himself sharing his own version of that dilemma, the gap between success and satisfaction, between meeting expectations and finding meaning. Priya listened with an attention his wife had stopped offering years ago, asking questions that suggested genuine interest rather than polite conversation. When they finally left the canteen, the sun was fully risen, and something indefinable had shifted between them. Over the following weeks, their interactions took on new dimensions. Jonathan began requesting Priya for surgeries where any qualified nurse would have sufficed. They took coffee breaks that lasted longer than necessary, their conversations ranging from medical ethics to books to the peculiar isolation of living in a hyper-efficient city-state. Jonathan found himself thinking about her during surgeries with other nurses, comparing their competence to Priya's, finding everyone wanting. Priya recognized the danger but couldn't seem to stop herself from engaging. His attention felt like validation beyond the professional, someone seeing her intelligence, appreciating her perspective, treating her as an equal despite every social barrier that said she wasn't. She began dressing more carefully on days she knew they'd work together, spending extra time on her appearance while telling herself it was just professional pride. The first kiss happened 3 months later, in February 2018, in an empty corridor near the surgical storage rooms at 2 a.m. They'd just completed a complex valve replacement, both running on adrenaline and the intimacy that came from hours of life-or-death coordination. Jonathan reached for her hand, ostensibly to emphasize a point about their surgical approach. Priya didn't pull away. Their eyes met, and the professional boundaries they'd both been testing collapsed entirely. "This is a terrible idea," Jonathan whispered, even as he leaned closer. "I know," Priya replied, not stepping back. The affair that developed was conducted with the meticulous planning they applied to surgical procedures. Jonathan rented a small apartment in Tiong Bahru under a corporate entity, a one-bedroom space that became their sanctuary from their respective realities. They met there twice weekly, usually after late shifts when absences were easily explained. Priya would arrive first, Jonathan following 30 minutes later to avoid being seen together. The relationship was more than physical, though the sexual chemistry was intense after months of suppressed attraction. They talked for hours, sharing their frustrations, dreams, and the parts of themselves they couldn't reveal in their official lives. Jonathan described the suffocation of his marriage, his sense of being trapped in a life that looked perfect from outside but felt empty from within. Priya shared her loneliness in Singapore, the weight of family expectations, the impossibility of dating within her community, where everyone knew everyone and gossip traveled faster than the MRT. Jonathan was careful with gifts, knowing that expensive presents would raise questions. He helped with her medical course fees when she pursued additional certifications, framing it as investment in a valuable team member. He ensured her shift schedules aligned with his when possible. He protected their secret with the same precision he applied to surgical planning, aware that discovery would destroy both their careers and his marriage. Priya knew she was the other woman, in a cliché as old as hospitals themselves. But the relationship felt different from sordid affairs she'd heard about from other nurses. Doctors who pursued staff for casual encounters then discarded them. Jonathan spoke of eventually leaving Grace, of the impossibility of continuing a marriage that was really just a business partnership. He never explicitly promised a future together, but he implied it in ways that allowed Priya to hope. By August 2018, they'd been involved for 6 months. Priya realized she'd missed her period. The pregnancy test she took in the Tiong Bahru apartment bathroom showed 2 lines that would complicate everything. When she told Jonathan, his reactions cycled through shock, concern, and a tenderness that made her believe they might actually navigate this together. "I need time to handle this properly," he said, holding her as she cried. "I'll talk to Grace. I'll figure out how to do this without destroying everything. I promise I'll take care of you and the baby." Priya wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. The alternative, raising a child alone in Singapore as a foreign worker, likely losing her job and visa status, was too terrifying to contemplate. She gave him time, waited for him to prepare for a conversation that would upend his entire life, and tried not to notice that weeks were passing without visible progress toward the resolution he'd promised. What neither of them knew was that Grace Chen had suspected something for months and had hired a private investigator to confirm her suspicions. The evidence file sitting in her law office now contained photographs, text messages, rental agreements for the Taeyong Baru apartment, and medical records showing Priya's pregnancy. Grace was methodically building a case, not for divorce, which would cost her half of Jonathan's assets and social standing, but for something far more calculated and destructive. Grace Chen had spent her entire life building perfect structures, first in academics, then in legal arguments, finally in the carefully curated life she'd constructed around her marriage and career. At 36, she was a senior partner at Drew & Napier, one of Singapore's most prestigious law firms, specializing in corporate litigation, where her reputation for ruthless preparation and aggressive cross-examination made her both feared and sought after by clients willing to pay premium rates for assured victories. Her childhood in Singapore's Mandarin-speaking elite had instilled values of faith, family obligation, and the paramount importance of maintaining social standing. Her father, Dr. Tan Boon Wee, had built his dental empire through meticulous attention to quality and aggressive business expansion. Her mother, Linda, managed charitable foundations and served on boards where Singapore's old money reinforced connections that sustained their class across generations. Grace and her two brothers were raised with the understanding that their achievements reflected on the family, that individual desires were subordinate to collective reputation, and that divorce was failure, a loss of face that transcended personal unhappiness. Her marriage to Jonathan had made strategic sense in 2008. Both families approved, their social circles overlapped, and their combined professional trajectories promised the kind of power couple status that Singapore's meritocracy celebrated. Grace had expected a partnership of mutual ambition, children who would attend the right schools, and a life that looked impressive from the outside, which was what really mattered in their social stratum. The absence of emotional intimacy didn't initially concern her. Grace had never been a romantic. She viewed marriage as a framework for building a successful life rather than a vehicle for personal fulfillment. Jonathan's emotional distance mirrored her own, and their relationship functioned adequately as a business arrangement with occasional physical intimacy that produced no children despite years without contraception. A failure Grace attributed to Jonathan's punishing work schedule rather than any biological issue. The first indication something had changed came in early 2018. Jonathan began working even later than usual, his explanations about complex surgeries and emergency cases technically plausible but somehow unconvincing. He became more distant during their increasingly rare conversations, distracted in ways that suggested his mind occupied elsewhere. Most tellingly, he started showering immediately upon arriving home from the hospital, a new habit that suggested washing away evidence rather than just surgical day grime. Grace's legal training made her observant of behavioral changes and skilled at investigating inconsistencies. She checked credit card statements, finding charges for the Taeyong Baru apartment rental disguised as professional expenses. She noted the pattern of his late nights, correlating them with the surgical schedule and finding gaps that couldn't be explained by operating room time. She observed him texting with unusual frequency, his expressions softening in ways she hadn't seen in years. The confirmation came from a private investigator she hired in May 2018. Within 3 weeks, he provided comprehensive documentation of Jonathan's affair. Photographs of him entering the Taeyong Baru apartment, Priya arriving separately, neither leaving for hours. Screenshots of text messages recovered from Jonathan's hospital computer. Witness statements from neighbors who'd seen the couple together. The investigator identified Priya as an Indian nurse on Jonathan's surgical team, providing background that revealed the full scope of the transgression. Grace's rage, when it came, was cold and analytical rather than hot and emotional. Jonathan hadn't just been unfaithful. He'd been unfaithful with a subordinate foreign worker, someone so far below their social status that the affair represented not just betrayal but humiliation. If this became public, Grace would be pitted as the wife who couldn't satisfy her husband enough to prevent him from slumming with his staff. The loss of face would be catastrophic, affecting her professionally, socially, and within her family structure. Divorce was unacceptable. Grace had no intention of giving up half of Jonathan's assets, her social position, or the life she'd spent 8 years building. But neither could she allow the affair to continue or permit Priya to believe she'd stolen a husband and gotten away with it. Grace needed a solution that would end the relationship, punish both offenders, and restore her control, all without the public spectacle that divorce would entail. The pregnancy discovery in September 2018 transformed Grace's simmering anger into calculated vengeance. Priya's medical records, obtained through connections at her father's dental clinics that shared billing systems with Mount Elizabeth, confirmed the pregnancy. Text message fragments between Jonathan and Priya discussed the baby, discussed futures together, discussed timelines for Jonathan leaving his marriage. The audacity stunned Grace. This nurse, this foreign worker whose visa status depended on her employment, was not only sleeping with a married man but had gotten pregnant and was expecting him to abandon his wife and social standing for her. The entitlement of it, the delusion that someone of her background could simply take what belonged to Grace, demanded a response that went beyond merely ending the affair. Grace began planning with the same meticulous attention she applied to complex litigation. She researched Priya's background, family connections, visa status, and employment terms. She documented every hospital policy regarding workplace relationships, conflict of interest, and professional conduct. She mapped the power structures at Mount Elizabeth, identifying administrators who would cooperate with what she was about to set in motion. Her plan required leverage over Jonathan, which the affair provided. She needed to destroy Priya's life systematically, reputation, career, visa status, and the pregnancy itself. And she needed to do this while appearing to be the dignified wife dealing with her husband's indiscretion, earning sympathy rather than judgment from the social circles that mattered. The confrontation with Jonathan came first, on October 15, 2018. Grace waited until he returned from a late shift, then calmly presented him with the investigator's evidence. Jonathan's face went through shock, denial, and finally resignation as she methodically described every detail of his affair. "I want a divorce," Jonathan said, his voice carrying defeat rather than defiance. "No," Grace replied with terrifying calm. "You want to end your career, destroy your reputation, and lose access to your patients and research? Because that's what happens if you divorce me. I'll make sure every hospital administrator, every colleague, every patient knows about your affair with your subordinate staff. Medical ethics boards take these things seriously, Jonathan. Doctor-patient confidentiality gets questioned when doctors can't maintain professional boundaries with their staff. Grace, I don't love you. I haven't for years. This marriage is what protects both of us," Grace interrupted. "You're going to end the relationship with your nurse immediately. You're going to transfer her off your surgical team. And you're going to recommit to this marriage publicly and convince me you've learned your lesson." "She's pregnant," Jonathan said quietly, watching Grace's face for reaction. Grace's expression didn't change. "Then she'll have to handle that on her own. She knew you were married. She made her choices. Now she'll live with consequences." Over the following weeks, Grace executed her plan methodically. She met with hospital administrators, expressing concern about her husband's overly close working relationship with a particular nurse, suggesting professional boundaries were being compromised. She provided anonymous documentation of policy violations to the hospital's Human Resources Department. She ensured that Priya's employment contract was reviewed for any infractions that could justify termination. But her most devastating move was scheduling a public confrontation at the hospital itself, where Priya's humiliation would be complete and witnessed by colleagues whose gossip would ensure her reputation was destroyed beyond recovery. Grace chose November 23, 2018, the day everything would end. November 23, 2018 began as an ordinary shift for Priya Sharma. She arrived at Mount Elizabeth at 6 a.m., 3 months pregnant and exhausted from morning sickness that made eating difficult and sleep elusive. Jonathan had been increasingly distant over the past month. Their meetings at the Tyong Baru apartment less frequent. His promises about handling the situation more vague. Priya tried not to catastrophize, telling herself he needed time to navigate the complications of leaving Grace, but anxiety gnawed at her during every moment she wasn't occupied with work. The surgery scheduled for 2 p.m., a routine coronary bypass, was cancelled when the patient developed a respiratory infection. Priya found herself with unexpected free time during what should have been a 4-hour procedure, catching up on documentation in the surgical nursing station when her supervisor approached with an unusual request. "Mrs. Grace Chen is here," the supervisor said, her expression uncomfortable. "She's asking to speak with you in the hospital director's conference room. Human Resources wants you to attend." Priya's stomach dropped. "Why? I don't know the details. But you should go now. Don't keep them waiting." The walk to the administrative wing felt like a death march. Priya's mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. The conference room was on the 8th floor, its glass walls overlooking the surgical wing where she'd worked beside Jonathan for the past 18 months. Inside, 5 people waited. Grace Chen in an immaculate cream suit, the hospital director Dr. Lim, the head of human resources, and 2 people Priya didn't recognize. "Miss Sharma, please sit," Dr. Lim said, his usual warmth replaced by administrative formality. Grace watched Priya with an expression of cold satisfaction as the human resources manager opened a folder containing what Priya immediately recognized as photographs from the Tyong Baru apartment. Her entering, Jonathan arriving after, intimate moments captured through windows that she'd never imagined were being surveilled. "We've received allegations of inappropriate conduct between yourself and Dr. Jonathan Chen," the HR manager began. "Hospital policy strictly prohibits romantic relationships between surgical team members, particularly those involving power dynamics between physicians and nursing staff. Such relationships create conflicts of interest and compromise patient care." Priya's voice failed. She looked at Grace, who smiled with predatory satisfaction. "These relationships are particularly problematic when they violate the terms of foreign worker employment," Grace added, her lawyer voice carrying prosecutorial authority. "Your visa sponsorship was granted for professional nursing work, not for conducting affairs with married doctors. Immigration authorities take these violations seriously. Mrs. Chen has also brought to our attention your pregnancy," Dr. Lim continued. "Given the timeline and your relationship with her husband, there are obvious concerns about how this affects your professional judgment and the hospital's reputation." The meeting continued for 90 minutes, a systematic destruction of Priya's character, career, and future. She was informed that her employment was being terminated immediately for violation of professional conduct policies. Her visa sponsorship would be withdrawn, requiring her to leave Singapore within 30 days. The hospital would not provide references that would allow her to work elsewhere in Singapore's healthcare system. And while they couldn't force her to terminate the pregnancy, they made clear that returning to India as an unwed single mother would carry social consequences she should carefully consider. Grace watched it all with the satisfaction of someone winning a case through superior preparation. She'd positioned herself as the wronged wife defending institutional integrity rather than seeking petty revenge. The hospital administrators, eager to avoid scandal, accepted her narrative and sacrificed Priya to protect their reputation and maintain good relationships with the Chun family, whose charitable donations funded an entire cardiac wing. When the meeting finally ended, Priya stumbled out of the conference room in shock. She tried calling Jonathan, but his phone went directly to voicemail. She texted him frantically, "Hospital knows, I've been fired, please call me," and received no response. By the time her shift would have normally ended, security had escorted her to her locker, watched her collect her belongings, and accompanied her out of the hospital she'd worked at for 18 months. She went to the Tyong Baru apartment, but the locks had been changed. She stood outside for 30 minutes, calling Jonathan repeatedly, until a neighbor asked if she needed help and she fled in humiliation. Back at her Woodlands flat, her roommates, who'd known about the relationship despite Priya's attempts at secrecy, tried to comfort her while making clear that word of her firing was already spreading through Singapore's Indian nursing community. At 11 p.m., Jonathan finally called. "Priya, I'm so sorry. Grace knows everything. She's threatening to destroy my career if I don't cut contact with you completely. I can't. I have patients depending on me, research that's—" "I've been fired," Priya interrupted, her voice breaking. "I have 30 days to leave Singapore. I'm pregnant with your child. And you're worried about your research. I'll send money," Jonathan said desperately. "I'll make sure you and the baby are taken care of financially. But I can't see you anymore. Grace will make sure I lose everything if I do. Please try to understand." Priya hung up, Jonathan's words about money echoing obscenely. He was reducing their relationship, their child, to a financial transaction he could resolve with bank transfers while he maintained his perfect life with his wife. The betrayal was complete. Over the following days, Priya's situation deteriorated rapidly. Her visa cancellation meant her room rental was technically illegal. She was required to leave within 30 days, but her landlord wanted her out immediately to avoid complications. The nursing community she'd relied on for social support ostracized her, viewing her affair with a married doctor as shameful and her pregnancy as deserving of judgment. The money Jonathan transferred, 20,000 Singapore dollars to cover her immediate needs, felt like blood money, compensation for destroying her life and career. Her family in Chennai called constantly, confused by her suddenly announced return after years of successful work in Singapore. Priya couldn't bring herself to tell them about the pregnancy or the real reason for her termination. She made vague references to contract issues and wanting to return home, each lie adding weight to her emotional collapse. On November 30th, 2018, 1 week after her termination, Priya made the decision that would seal her fate. She would confront Grace Chen directly, appeal to her as one woman to another, beg for the chance to stay in Singapore long enough to figure out her options. It was desperate, illogical, and doomed to fail, but desperation had consumed her ability to think strategically. She learned Grace's schedule through contacts at the law firm, discovering that Grace worked late most Fridays, usually leaving her office around 9 p.m. Priya positioned herself in the Drew and Napier building lobby on December 7th, waiting for Grace to emerge from the elevators. When she did, Priya approached with a combination of hope and humiliation that made her voice shake. "Mrs. Chun, please. I need to speak with you." Grace's expression shifted from surprise to cold calculation. "Miss Sharma, I have nothing to say to you. Security should have prevented you from entering this building. Please," Priya begged, not caring that people in the lobby were watching. "I know I made mistakes, but the baby, your husband's child, doesn't deserve to suffer because That baby is your problem, not mine," Grace interrupted. "You slept with a married man. You knew exactly what you were doing. And now you're experiencing the natural consequences of your actions. I suggest you use whatever time you have left in Singapore to make arrangements for your return to India." "I'll tell people the truth," Priya said, desperation making her reckless. "I'll tell everyone about how you're forcing your husband to abandon his child. How you used your connections to destroy my career, because you can't accept that your marriage was over before I ever." The slap came so fast Priya didn't see it coming. Grace's palm connected with her face with enough force to turn her head, the sound echoing through the lobby like a gunshot. Security guards rushed forward, but Grace raised her hand to stop them. "This woman is harassing me," Grace said, her voice carrying lawyerly authority. "She's been stalking my husband, making threats. I want her removed from the building immediately and banned from this property." The security guards, seeing a well-dressed professional woman versus a distressed foreign worker, made their decision based on appearances. They grabbed Priya's arms, forcibly escorting her toward the exit despite her protests. In the struggle, one guard's grip twisted her arm painfully, causing her to cry out. Grace watched from the lobby with the same cold satisfaction she'd displayed during Priya's hospital termination. What happened next would be reconstructed from security footage and witness testimony. As the guards pushed Priya through the revolving glass doors, she stumbled on the threshold, her pregnancy affecting her balance. She fell forward onto the concrete steps outside, landing hard on her stomach. The pain was immediate and devastating, a cramping that signaled something catastrophically wrong. Grace stood in the lobby watching through glass as Priya curled on the ground, blood beginning to stain her dress. The security guards called for an ambulance, but Grace made no move to help. She simply turned and walked back to the elevator, her expression betraying no emotion beyond the satisfaction of a problem eliminated. Priya Sharma died 3 hours later at Singapore General Hospital. The fall had caused placental abruption, leading to massive hemorrhaging that doctors couldn't control despite emergency surgery. The baby, a boy who would have been named Arjun, according to the journal found in her belongings, died before the ambulance arrived. The investigation that followed was thorough due to the involvement of prominent families and the dramatic nature of events. Security footage showed the entire confrontation, Grace's slap, and the guards' forceful removal of Priya from the building. Medical examinations confirmed that the fall, combined with Priya's already fragile condition from stress and malnutrition following her termination, had caused the fatal hemorrhaging. Grace Chen was arrested and charged with voluntarily causing grievous hurt resulting in death, a charge that carried up to life imprisonment under Singapore's penal code. Her defense team argued she'd acted in self-defense against harassment, that the security guards were responsible for the excessive force, and that Priya's death was a tragic accident rather than foreseeable consequence of a single slap. The prosecution presented a different narrative, that Grace had systematically destroyed Priya's life through calculated actions at the hospital, that she'd demonstrated callous disregard for human life by walking away as Priya bled out, and that her assault had directly led to the chain of events causing 2 deaths. Dr. Jonathan Chen testified reluctantly, his career already in tatters from the scandal. He admitted to the affair, confirmed the pregnancy, and acknowledged that Grace had threatened to destroy him professionally if he maintained contact with Priya. His testimony painted Grace as a woman consumed by vengeance to the point of accepting any collateral damage. The trial lasted 8 months and became a sensation in Singapore's typically reserved media landscape. It exposed fault lines in the city-state's carefully maintained facade, the exploitation of foreign workers, the power dynamics that made relationships across class lines dangerous, and the lengths to which the privileged would go to maintain their position. Grace Chen was ultimately convicted of voluntarily causing grievous hurt and sentenced to 12 years imprisonment. Her law partnership was dissolved, her social standing evaporated, and her marriage to Jonathan ended in a divorce that gave him surprisingly favorable terms given the circumstances. Grace emerged from the trial a pariah, her obsession with maintaining face having destroyed the very reputation she'd killed to protect. Jonathan Chen lost his position at Mount Elizabeth Hospital but eventually rebuilt his career at a public hospital, his skills too valuable to be permanently sidelined despite the scandal. He established a foundation in Priya's name providing scholarships for Indian nursing students, a gesture that felt inadequate but was the only redemption he could offer. Priya Sharma's body was returned to Chennai for cremation. Her family, learning the full truth through trial testimony, was left with grief complicated by shame, anger at Jonathan's cowardice, and bewilderment at how their successful daughter's life had ended in such tragedy. The money from Jonathan's foundation and the victim compensation from Singapore's government helped establish a clinic in Chennai offering free maternal health care to poor women, a living memorial to a woman whose life was sacrificed on the altar of another couple's dysfunction. The legacy of Priya's death extended beyond individual tragedy. Singapore implemented stricter oversight of workplace relationships in medical settings, enhanced protections for foreign workers reporting harassment, and created clearer pathways for addressing power imbalances in professional relationships. Mount Elizabeth Hospital revised its policies, mandating conflict of interest disclosures and providing resources for staff in vulnerable situations. But beneath these institutional changes, the fundamental dynamics remained largely unchanged. Foreign workers still navigated Singapore's hierarchy, where their value was measured in economic contribution rather than human dignity. Wealthy families still wielded disproportionate power to protect their interests, and ambitious professionals still destroyed those who threatened their carefully constructed lives. Priya Sharma came to Singapore with dreams of security and professional fulfillment. She worked hard, excelled in her field, and committed the understandable error of believing that love could transcend the barriers of class, nationality, and power. She died because she dared to hope that a man's promises meant more than his social standing, and because a woman's rage at being betrayed was directed at the vulnerable rather than the guilty. 3 lives destroyed, Priya's ended, Grace's imprisoned, Jonathan's morally bankrupted. And in Chennai, a family still grieves the daughter who went seeking prosperity and found only tragedy in the city of rules. May Priya rest in peace. May her story remind us that no amount of efficiency, wealth, or social order can excuse cruelty dressed in professional language. And may we build worlds where women like Priya Sharma never again have to trade dignity for opportunity in cities that value order over justice.